Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers podcast. Good to be here today with the wonderful Ariel Efergan. Ariel is the global vice president for a company called MDI Health. So, Ariel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, what is MDI Health? Let's start there. What do you guys do?
So MDI Health is really tackling one of the leading causes of death in healthcare, which is really problems from medication treatment. So we're talking about drugs that are intentionally prescribed to patients that would be one of the top 5 leading causes of death, one of the highest drivers of costs in healthcare. And so we've essentially invented a new way to utilize AI medication management at scale to reduce total cost of care. So it's a much more direct and tangible way to identify high-risk patients for problems from drug treatment and then actually autonomously drive clinical intervention at scale, again, to reduce total cost of care.
Cool. Okay, so describe it a little bit. What's the solution?
Yeah, so essentially it's an AI platform that we partner with risk-bearing organizations like health plans, value-based providers, et cetera, to essentially help them optimize drug treatment for their patients from a population level. So we're identifying high-risk individuals. The AI is kind of analyzing them at the level that a clinician would. Actually a little bit more comprehensively, and then pinpointing the most impactful changes to their drug treatment and autonomously providing a clinical recommendation to a provider to make those changes.
Interesting. And this is a startup, right? Where's it at?
Yeah, we're a venture-backed startup. We're backed by some pretty big investment funds like Intel Capital, Hanako Ventures, Welltech, Maverick Ventures, etc. And we were actually founded several years ago by one of the kind of world-leading experts on drug safety, she was actually the head founder of the drug safety department in the Israeli Ministry of Health and led drug interaction software and pharmacy services for the second largest HMO in the world, and is a clinical pharmacist by training. And this really came out of her need to kind of scale intervention. So essentially, the story goes, she's good friends with our CEO now, and they were on vacation together with their families, and he was hearing about her amazing outcomes. He doesn't come from healthcare at all. Okay, knew nothing. And basically, people who went to her clinics were in wheelchairs and were able to start walking again after years of not walking. Were out of work, able to return to work. Literally insane stuff. He's like, why don't we just take AI and scale what you're doing? This is insane. Like, use technology. She's like, no, it can't be done. Can't be done with tech. It can only be done, on a small scale. And I'm happy to say that she went from, treating a couple hundred patients a year to now managing hundreds of thousands of patients across the country. And MDI was born.
That's incredible. And when did you join?
A year after they really started kind of the initial ideating. So I joined as part of the founding team.
Very cool. And you have kind of a background with this. I know you're an advisor to you're a venture advisor for Redesign, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So spent all of my time in health tech. Before that, started a different company called Pangea Medical that was creating a new complex care model utilizing SDOH. Do some work with some other health tech startups, and then did some consulting for a bit, thinking about my next move. And right when MDI was starting out, got introduced by one of their investors, and just loved the problem, something I personally connected to. We all deal with these types of issues, and I really believe that there was just a huge impact that technology could make here in a really tangible way. There was a lot of buzz around tech and healthcare and what can actually be done and what can't be. And so I just, loved the problem and ultimately decided to join.
Jumped in. So what's your framework to a founder approaching the idea of any kind of venture, raising, funding, the entire conversation? You're obviously on the pro side of it based on your, but I'm sure you have some sort of framework. When is it a positive thing? How could it be a negative thing? What are your thoughts?
I think it's a really tricky question.
Welcome to the podcast.
Taking venture funding, I think sets you on a certain trajectory of really achieving a certain level of product market fit within a specific time frame and solving a problem within a specific time frame, versus without that pressure, you don't even have to have those kind of what are called venture-backed timelines. And so I think ultimately, there's many scenarios where you don't need to raise venture level money and you can still scale and grow a great business. And I think a lot of people, think about that in the wrong way. They think to be a really big company, you do need that. The other thing I would say is just how important it is to come from a problem-solving first approach, right? Don't come with a solution and try to find a problem, because that will never work with a venture-backed timeline or raising money. And it's really about, deeply, deeply caring about the problem that you're solving, which is, what we've done at MDI and ultimately has kind of led to our success this far.
Yeah. And what is the success this far? What have you guys done in the market?
So I would say we're kind of the leading platform that's really using AI to automate medication management and taking a safety first approach. So what we did that was pretty different from everyone else out there is we really looked to essentially recreate a pharmacist, I don't want to say brain, but kind of like a pharmacist's brain in AI. So actually looking at everything about an individual, not just drug interactions, but rather their, medical history, lab data, demographic information, et cetera, and being able to consider it on a level of kind of clinical relevance as well as how pressing that issue is, and be able to properly identify clinical issues just like a clinician would, and then actually autonomously provide clinical recommendations around the actual safety and efficacy of that therapy for an individual, versus a lot of other organizations really kind of are doing more check the box items and looking at how to identify gaps in care and other, more important work. But ultimately, that's something with technology, it's much more easy to build, versus we took a much harder path, which is actually trying to get something clinically accurate and then going about building the business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how does the pharmacist interact with MDI? Is it integrated into some sort of system they already use, or are they logging in directly? What's the...
Yeah, so we typically sell to the risk-bearing organizations, and they're using us for reducing total cost of care. So it could be under the population health department, under a pharmacy, under utilization management. It really depends. But for the pharmacists, we're really supercharging them, right? So we're all the time they spend looking at 10 different systems and trying to decide how to spend their best time on what patients to work on and what recommendations to make, et cetera. We've automated that entire process. And so we're essentially, 6Xing of pharmacist capacity. And then we also can do it, fully managed service, et cetera. But it's really about scaling pharmacist-led intervention, which has been proven time and time again to drive meaningful changes to cost, not only from an RX spend perspective, but also from a utilization spend perspective.
Yeah. Let's talk about selling for a second, because, it sounds like you guys are selling to a lot of larger organizations, payers and systems and things like that. And those buying cycles are, famously very difficult and very long. And for a startup, it's always a question like, where do you put your resources, And I've been with at a couple of different roundtables and different things with kind of government entities, and they get there and they talk about their innovation arms and how they, public-private partnerships. And I always laugh because it's like, no one no one that I've met in their real, when they're honest, in their right mind, actually thinks of government as like the correct playground for actual, innovation. And if you're a startup and you've got resources to look at three different, to look at three different clients, I really don't think government's going to be one of them, because the pain versus the gain just isn't there. And I'd say that argument can be made very strongly for kind of some of these larger organizations as well. So how do you reconcile the, how do I guess, approach looking to sell to some of these larger organizations and payers and things like that with a startup mentality? What does that look like?
Yeah. So first off, I would say selling in healthcare enterprise is just hard as shit, and is really not fun, for better or worse. I mean, on the one hand, it is healthcare. So if we mess up, it's not like someone's food doesn't get delivered on time, someone could die or, God forbid, or something like that. And so I think there is, good reason for why it's very risk averse. On the other hand, I think the biggest issue is really just the incentives in healthcare are so perverse. And when you talk to people from outside the US and try to explain to them what you're doing and like why you have such a difficult time getting into these organizations, they're all in absolute shock as to how that could be that you have a solution that is paying for itself, doesn't cost money up front, is going to significantly improve a patient's quality of life, clinical outcomes, and save the organization money. And it still can take you between 12 months to 2 years to close an initial deal. So let's start by saying, yeah, it's very, very difficult. I think ultimately it's really about understanding the nuances of how these organizations buy. And you have to look at the framework that within which they're purchasing different lines of business, whether it's by, line of business like Medicare, commercial, et cetera, a disease state program, a pharmacy specific initiative, and understanding both the organizational need, but also the individual's KPI. Because a lot of times you'll find those things don't actually align. And even though in theory it might sound good to the organization and it might make sense at an organizational level, there's no one actually responsible for doing that work. And so you have to figure out the buyer and how they buy and what it speaks to, even though it might logically make sense. Healthcare is not a very logical industry.
Expand on that a little bit, because I'm just kind of listening to it, and it's a good point. How do you because so many people go in with their own lens on, and they forget to take off their glasses and try to put on the buyer's glasses and look at what's actually important to them. And so, besides for just, I guess the first step is obviously being aware and cognizant, but how do you actually go about doing that?
Yeah, so I would say one is relationships in healthcare are very important. For better or worse, probably for worse, it's a very antiquated industry where, at the end of the day, relationships win. I think, understanding that is important. And, ultimately, you should definitely bring in really strong advisors, a really strong board, people who have those connections, because that's what's going to help you better understand the market in a real day. What's being said behind closed doors is what you have to understand. That's kind of one component. The second component I would say that's really important is understanding that every organization is different. The same title at one health plan could mean something entirely different at a different health plan, which could lead you going down a very different route. So understanding that individual organization is important. And then ultimately, understanding the flow of dollars in healthcare. I think a lot of people fail to do that and fail to understand, what's the impact of star ratings on how they're buying things. And because this measure is changing, they're actually shifting their strategy to something that might, make a little bit less sense on paper. And so understanding that, things like, for instance, value-based care, right? And the changes to risk adjustment and what's happening, with the stock prices around, Oak Street Health and all these other kind of value-based providers, and originally what they were doing to make money versus what's needed now and the strategy that CVS bought them for, those things change. I think having a understand, and why did they change? Because of the changing landscape of the flow of dollars in healthcare. So you really got to understand, how do those dollars flow? It's very different if you're going to a provider first org or a payer first org or a patient first approach. And so I would say that's kind of maybe the third vertical of understanding the nuances of healthcare sales.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. I would even say it's not just the people, the titles of people that can mean different things, but the actual words that you use to describe your pain point can mean very different things in different organizations. Like the thing that you're solving, the words that you use can literally be in a different dictionary in a different part of the organization. And it's so, like in my space of care coordination can mean so many different things to so many different people. And so, one of the first things that we do is just clarify and validate what we're talking about when we say care coordination and what that means to the person we're talking to. But yeah, I love your point about it, understanding the flow of dollars. It's obviously so important. It's difficult because it's difficult because it's difficult. It's complicated. But I was at this conference a couple weeks back, and there was a group there on the exhibit hall that was trying to sell these I don't even know exactly what they were. They were really cool, to be honest. They were like these little it was like a patch that had some sort of magnetic pulse, electro pulse, something or another that it was like a massage gun that was really, really good. And it was just like a patch, and you could put it on your shoulders or your back or wherever hurts. And it kind of uses almost I don't know, some sort of electromagnetic pulse to get this thing done. Anyway, these guys are busy trying to sell it to the people at the conference for $1,000 a unit. And they were super salesy about it too. It was listen, for you, it's the beginning of the day. Here's what I could do for you. I could knock off $67. And I'm like, do you guys know where you are? I'm like, this is a healthcare conference. Every other booth here is busy trying to figure out how can I get you paid through using my product so that it's a no-brainer for you to use my product. And also, they're not trying to sell the actual people here. They're trying to sell to a system or a plan or something. And these guys have been trying to sell, like they're in the shook. It was pretty funny. But yeah, it's really critical to, but to understand the flow of dollars. Where do you go to kind of keep on top of things and keep on top of where the market's at from that perspective?
Yeah, I would say at the end of the day, government is king. CMS is the dictator of healthcare. It all kind of flows from that. So I would say following what CMS is doing pretty closely and kind of the changes that happen in MA, Medicare, of course, Medicaid is more state by state. But a lot of trends of healthcare payment stem from that. I would also, again, it's going to be different. If you're selling to health plans, you're selling to employer groups, MSOs, whatever you're selling to, it really depends. But ultimately, I think, a lot of these industry leaders, they give good insights. A lot of the healthcare conferences, sometimes they're good. Usually it's a bunch of BS that, people just repeating talk tracks of what everyone wants to hear, as you know. But ultimately, I would say some newsletters are pretty good. I also definitely think that just talking to the organizations themselves and listening, how their strategies are changing and understanding, what are they looking at for this budget cycle, for next year's budget cycle, that's obviously the best, the source of truth.
Yeah. And I think the underlying kind of common denominator is ask questions. When you're in there, ask questions. So many people just go in and talk the whole time, Yeah.
Yeah, I think asking is the most important thing in healthcare is, being a very critical listener, because again, the differences between every organizations can be so drastic, even though they have the same title, they're going after the same market, they're serving the same patient base. The way they operate could be completely different. The impact of their stars could be completely different. The impact of, the different business lines they're expanding to, et cetera, could be very different. And so picking up on what are the levers that you're going to be able to influence and that are going to change how you sell and, what your value prop is, and knowing that up front and knowing to ask those questions up front is critical.
Yep. Yeah. And again, I'm going to go back to the word that listen. There's a difference between hearing and listening, right? Don't just hear. Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the difference between selling to plans versus systems in your view? What are kind of some of those differences?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of big differences. One, in general, healthcare, just from CMS's perspective, a lot of the paying organizations' perspective, there's a big shift right now happening where all these health plans are really offloading their risk to providers. So you will see over time a more convergence of how those two organizations are buying, why they're buying certain things is becoming more and more aligned as we shift more to value-based care, as the incentive structure is kind of more aligned. But I would say primarily a couple of different things. One is reimbursement rates and how long it takes these organizations to get reimbursed. Two is the impact of, star ratings, HEDIS measures, other quality metrics, and the different ways those impact either a payer organization or a provider organization. The other one, I would say member engagement is very important on the health plan and payer side. I would say, provider engagement is important on both sides, but for different reasons. And so understanding kind of where your system fits in and the flow of that. And then last, I would say there's also a big push to pushing things outside the four walls of healthcare, of a health system, right? And so with that push, organizations selling to those entities are going to have a much more difficult time, probably finding their champion and understanding exactly where they should be going to. And I would also say that ultimately, oftentimes because it's follow the money, right? The health plans are going to be very long sales cycles, are very difficult, but ultimately longer term, better customers than the health systems.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes though, the the reputation that some of these people have, some of the health plans, that they just kind of like string you along and then they put you in for some sort of pilot, and kind of like the intention is for the pilot never to go anywhere. Is that your experience, or is that just for people that have crappy products?
So I would say I've actually noticed a big shift over the last couple of years of health plans and kind of organizations in general in healthcare getting much more better at properly identifying the right opportunities for them and letting you know up front kind of what their process is, what's involved in that, whether it's an RFP or whether it's a kind of formal whatever kind of department that they have that they make organizations go through and fill out these questionnaires. So I would say that's actually gotten a lot better. Ultimately, in terms of that reputation, it lies both for providers and health plans, right? They want to get as much as they can for free, like all of us. So definitely having the right mechanisms in place to understand, okay, what are very clear success metrics? And if we hit these success metrics, I'm working this into the contract that it automatically converts to a longer term engagement.
Smart. Like that. Coming back to MDI for a second. What are kind of some of the goals for 24, 25? What are you guys working on for the, like, kind of the immediate future?
Yeah. So maybe I'll step back and just, one thing I think that's very important to point out in building venture-backed businesses in healthcare is having a really good understanding of, are you building in an existing market, or are you building a market that is new, and kind of being a leader, right, in that? And those two things are very different, right? And so for us, we're really kind of leading a new market, which we believe over the long term is a better strategic approach to really impacting as many patients as we possibly can, which is that today, pharmacy is really kind of looked at as almost of a commodity in healthcare. It's really around, managing drug delivery and adherence or other star ratings, formulary and specialty spend. Whereas now people are starting to understand, hey, pharmacist-led intervention actually impacts total cost of care, and they should really be taken into account throughout the care continuum. And so we're seeing a lot of big organizations hiring now their kind of first pop health pharmacist or their first pharmacy department that's going to work in tandem with care management for more kind of care management roles. And so that's just kind of starting out. And so our objective is to really, one, accelerate that wheel as much as possible, because the data is out there, the clinical studies are out there. It's been shown, pharmacy-led intervention can literally save thousands of dollars on a per patient basis annually. And we see that as well in our own data. On average, we're saving around $1,600 per patient. We take full risk on those dollars. And ultimately, I think that positioning ourselves to kind of lead that wave is really our goal going forward. And of course, just, engaging more organizations, being able to have more successful patient outcomes, just improve healthcare and, achieve our mission that we're out here to do.
Love it. Then final question for you, just on the general landscape of kind of, AI in healthcare. You guys are obviously going the co-pilot fashion, which I'm personally a huge fan of. I think augmentation is the key, especially around administrative things and some other things that are very obvious. But the point is that as a co-pilot sits behind human, I think that that's really, the correct path. But you being kind of out there and talking to some of these organizations, I'm hearing some of them are still very excited. A lot of people are actually moving pretty rapidly in the other direction, being very concerned about government regulation around anything AI. And so that the concern is, you don't really want to invest right now because they could just, slam the hammer down in a couple months or whatever it is, pull the rug out. So what's kind of the temperature that you're getting from the general, market when you talk AI tools?
Healthcare is a notoriously slow industry. And so even though everyone's talking about it and wants to be involved, et cetera, they're all very cautious still. And they're still, like, at the end of the day, I have my core competency as a health plan. It's signing up more members and reducing the cost to that, perfect 15-85% ratio and impacting MLR. If you're a provider, it's about seeing patient, improving care, et cetera. And so I would say a lot of these organizations, when they're looking at AI, are taking a very cautious approach. I think for the most part, they don't actually care so much about it in as much as they get the outcomes, right? For us, they don't care if they get better pharmacy outcomes from 1,000 pharmacists sitting in a call center or an AI doing it, right? What they care about is the cost at the end of the day for better or worse. And ultimately, I think they also have to understand, what is AI, right? A lot of the use cases that these organizations are using are AI that's been around forever, right? They're decision trees, et cetera. They're not large language models or machine learning models that are very complex to build, et cetera. So I think once those become more attuned to healthcare, which I think we will see a lot of regulation around, then I think the conversation becomes a little bit different. But for today, people like the buzzword. A lot of them are looking for an AI strategy. How that actualizes in reality in terms of changing buying patterns, I think time will tell. But there's definitely a lot of talk about it, and it is exciting. I think it does have incredible potential. It's just about people, understanding what is the tangible potential, I would say.
Yep. And I think you're spot on with don't focus on the AI. That technology matters a lot less than the actual applications. I completely agree with you there. I think that's really wise. Well, this was a lot of fun. Ariel, thanks so much for spending time today. I wish you and MDI tremendous continued success in executing in the market and caring for, helping save some of the spend in this country that's completely out of hand, and obviously mainly creating better outcomes for patients. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.